is Behind the Games from newoverlords.com, where we seek creators of all kinds to find out what's behind our favorite games. With your hosts, Jeff and Seema.
This is Behind the Games, and from our Midwest studio, I'm Jeff Villemek.
And from our Northeast studio, I'm Seema.
Today, we're really excited to be joined by an indie developer who we met through our Boston Indie Connections, and you've heard a couple of those episodes and interviews. Somara Atkinson is closing in on releasing his first game, and we have tons of questions about what that's like. Samara, hello.
How's it going? Good evening.
Going great, and really glad to have you here. I am really excited because I've been thinking, just dreaming in my head, and who knows if it'll happen. This day may never come, but I may one day want to release a game of my own, some sort of game. And
yeah,
Seema and I have talked to AAA developers, and we've talked to developers in a whole bunch of different roles, but I'm really excited to hear someone who's just on the cusp of getting a game out there. It's already wish listable in Steam, and we'll talk about what that game is, but we're going to have tons of questions about what that feels like, what that journey's been like, and all of that. So why don't you kick it off with a little bit of background, how you got to this point where you wanted to start to get into games, how it kicked off, and we'll go from there.
Cool. So I started with college. I went to Rochester Institute of Technology. I actually found the game maker community while I was in high school, and it was just something to just do for fun. And then when I was talking with this, I don't know, I'm guessing I don't even know his age, but like this guy in France, and I was talking to him about the game he was working on. During a conversation, he was like, "Oh wait, I forgot about the time difference. You're like super like it's like 1 a.m. for you or something. You should be getting ready for school," because he knew I was in high school. And then I was like, don't worry about it. I can do this all day. And then I had this epiphany. I can do this all day. This is a job for someone, and I'm doing it for fun. I should do it and get paid for it. And then it's just like combine those two things. And then I started like looking into things, and then eventually a cousin of mine who works at Firaxis helped point me towards RIT.
Excellent. And that is a good school. We've talked about that school before. So you're there. Did you study game development at RIT?
Yes, I went for their 4-year Bachelor's of Science Game Design and Development program.
Did you have to like specialize within that program? I know those programs are pretty diverse and different with the way they work. Do you have to specialize in a particular area?
So it's changed quite a bit, which is interesting to like talk to like later grads and then like friends of mine who are like working at the school now, or to have just talked to later students. When I was there, it was sort of what you made of it. Like you could take just a very generalist classes and get your degree and be done, but there was opportunity for you to specialize the way you wanted to. So a lot of my friends were interested in being programmers, so like they started taking more like programming heavy courses to like do things into like graphics programming, or like get into like deeper types of like game engine architecture and things like that.
And what did you end up specializing in?
So I was interested more in design, so I tried to take classes that would give me more opportunities to like play with different types of mechanics and like how to think about building games.
Yeah.
I still had to do lots of programming. Like there was no getting away from that at that school.
Which is great for anyone who's in, and we've talked to many developers, many creators at this point in the games industry. Understanding the other disciplines can make, even if you specialize or go into a particular area, make your ability to interact with all of those other team members potentially eventually, if you're getting involved in a team, understand what they're doing and understand the disciplines.
So in a program like that, are there people that specialize in the art or the music of games, or are those going down the art degree and the music degree lane?
So for art, there were actually like so we were in like the College of computer science, I believe the whole like department building was called. So there was actually like a college of like arts, and there was actually like a 3D digital graphics major there. So usually as soon as we figured out someone was like interested in art and animation, we tried to like get you out of Golisano and into the like art college.
Yeah.
Hopefully sooner rather than later.
Interesting.
There's a lot of crossover of disciplines within art and graphic design that probably it's good to be involved around that, and cross media at that point. Same thing with software development, crossing disciplines and crossing industries. he could probably take skills out of game development and apply them in other industries. I'm sure in a lot of ways, the core development skills are development skills. So that's useful.
Yeah. I knew of a few people who like minored in game design and development and then like had the 3D digital graphics major. But usually if you were interested in the art background, just because we didn't have like they like that's a full art degree.
Yeah. Right.
So that's usually like, yeah, just go over there. Like that's where you want to be.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So you did that, RIT, and then what came next?
I had an internship a few months after college, and then I just had like a regular day job when I was like looking in between like for my like full-time opportunity. And that was for like maybe a year and a half. And then I found my current company, which is we make software for nonprofits, which initially I just got the job because like, okay, I need some kind of career job moving somewhere beyond just
Mm-hmm.
like just a 9 to 5. And this wasn't game dev, but it is a career, like moving in some kind of tech field that applies my skills and takes me somewhere forward. And I've just been very happy there. So I've just been there for like December makes 7 years.
And that's great. And again, so you took some of those baseline skills, and this is pretty common in a lot of technical disciplines these days. Take some of those
Yes,
baseline skills out of game development and apply them in a different industry or in a different direction.
exactly.
But then you had this idea of still messing around at all hours of the day and night, I'm sure, with
Yeah.
with games. Is with
Yes.
all of us, games are in our heads. Well, all
Yeah.
of us here and probably all the people listening. So
Yeah.
what happened then that got you back towards that direction of I should do something with games?
I want to say it was maybe a couple years into my current job, maybe like 2 or 3. My friend Nick, who I'll mention again later, because he helped me with my current project, he actually messaged me and he was like, "Hey, Samara, a couple of other people that you know and I are working on a video game. Well, we're working on a fighting game, and I know how much you like fighting games, and I know how much interest you are in like design, and we could use someone who's helping with level design." And I couldn't say yes fast enough.
Right.
Yeah, it sounds
Like,
perfect.
yeah, like I'm pretty sure I had to like be in a meeting in like 60 seconds, and I was like, I'm gonna be late to this meeting, so I can tell him yes.
Yeah.
So then he and I, and then a couple of other friends, we were working on that for a few years, and then we eventually canceled the project because it was just overscoped, and it was like, all right, for all the things that we wanted to do, we're not really making the progress that we need to see. We need to just like be honest with ourselves about where we are and what we're trying to do, and just like scrap this.
Yeah.
And then a couple of months, I kind of took like a couple months of breaks of just not doing any kind of indie side stuff. And then I was like, okay, I still want to make games, even though we had to cancel this. What's something that I can make on my own? Or like does not require me to suddenly go out and like hire an army of people to just get stuff done. I could do most of the work on my own. And then I started like just scribbling down ideas in like Microsoft Word, and then slowly started like prototyping things until I would just work on weekends until I got to where I am now with Parkour Posse.
So before we get to Parkour Posse, and I want to dig into that quite a bit, and we're going to spend some time
Yeah.
there. But that decision with a team of so two parts to that, which I think are probably really interesting for people to hear about, is picking a scope, trying to go after something, and I think this is not this happens all the time. Too big a scope. It's you got these grand plans, got these big ideas, and you end up with something that's way too big for one. So how do you what is your advice to people to ensure that you don't pick up something that's too big for one? And for two, then the next question we'll get to is how do you make the decision to call it quits, to
Yeah.
put a cap on it?
Yeah, how do you get there?
Yeah.
I guess like as you become more experienced, like more experienced than me, you become better at being able to just sort of like rough guess and just sort of say like, okay, we have this many people, we have this much funding. You'll be able to sort of instinctively know what scope is just through like
Yep.
a work experience. Honestly, so I'd actually say the advice that my friend Claude gave me, what we should have followed is like, all right, take what you want to do, cut it in half, and cut it in half again, and just keep chopping it in half until you actually think your game is too small and it's perfect size.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes such sense.
Scope creep after you start can also be a killer, but too big a scope before you start could certainly be a killer. I think one of the things that I've heard is a best practice, and we talked a little bit about it with Inktail, is creating a vertical slice as quickly as you can. Taking a slice of your game where you can create enough of the game that you can get a feel for it, you can get a game loop done, you can see what it's going to take even to do that core, that thin slice, so that you don't end up putting yourself into a situation where you're just working on the clouds for a year.
Or while you're working on the clouds, you decide that there's this new cloud technology, so you're going to make new clouds, start them over.
Yeah.
This is Star Citizen. This is what those guys are doing, and they've been taking like 6 months now to develop new clouds. I think that's what they've been working on. That's with one of the last dev blogs. Yeah. This exactly.
I will say that it's interesting because I remember I had a friend who worked there for a little bit, and I sort of heard a little bit about like what they were doing. Like they asked her, they talked to her about like doing this sort of shield technology for ships. So first they're like, okay, we want you to have these like energy shields that wrap around like ships. And she was like, all right, cool. Like just like graphics of just the ship. She's like, wait. So we wanted to like conform to the ship shape. So basically like if a ship is like, shaped like an X-Wing, it conforms, or I'm just using random ships because, X-Wing's popular. Okay. So like, if we had an X-Wing, it would conform around those wings. If we had a Y-Wing, it would conform around that shape. And she was like, okay, obviously more complicated because it's, needs to procedurally figure out the shape of the ship, but still doable. And then they were like, and we want any damage that the ship takes. So like, let's say if it's an X-Wing and it loses one of those wings, the ship shield will like reconform to the current shape. Sorry?
Yeah. It will heal.
Yeah, and then reconform. So like it'll reconform around the 3 wings and then like to the actual current existing shape. And she was just like, okay, listen. You don't need a programmer. You need a mathematician.
Yeah. Yeah, you need
like this is not a programming, so this is a math problem.
you're inventing you're inventing new physics and math. And each one of those ands is not like an incremental amount of additional work. It's exponential. Okay, now you've magnified the job by 10 to get to shield conformance. Now you have destructible ships and you want the shield to be immediately reconfiguring. Okay, that's another. Now we're at 100 times the initial estimate.
Yeah.
Nothing's impossible. The improbable just takes lots and lots of time and money.
Yeah.
Which is where they're at. But it's really exciting and it's really advanced, but they've spent a lot of money. And for a small team that's trying to get a first thing out the door, you can get yourself into a hole really, really quickly.
Yeah. I guess two of the things I'll say is one is that like we can get stuck in a hole is that like when you're really enthusiastic about what you want to build and then your friends are enthusiastic, you all are just like there's this feedback loop of like I'm excited, you're excited, and like as we're going back and forth, we're both pumping each other up, and it's harder to pull yourself back and say, wait a minute, let's think like let's take back and think like, is this like a real good plan? You're like, but it's going to be so cool, and you're both just telling each other how cool it will be, and you just keep going.
Yeah.
And then the second thing that can happen a lot is you just being being afraid of how far you've come, and you're like, well, we can't throw all this work away. Like we've come so far.
Yes.
Like we have to keep going.
And this is called the sunk cost fallacy.
There it is. I was literally like, what is the term for this?
Yes.
I literally heard like a VP say this 3 weeks ago. I was like, what is that thing called?
Yes. Sunk cost fallacy. That means we've put all of this effort into it. Well, we got to keep going now.
Yeah.
Then you're potentially throwing good money after bad and continuing to
it just makes it worse.
Yeah.
It is so seductive though, that fallacy.
It is.
Yeah. Like sunk cost combined with like that loop of just like you all are both like you care about making it because you are passionate about it. Because this isn't a thing you'd be working on if you just like you didn't care.
Right. Okay, so you guys eventually did get to that position where you said, all right, we've we've got to have a meeting. Everybody,
Yeah.
everybody come in. How did that decision come about, and what was that point in the process feeling like?
It was my friend Nick because he was basically like the project lead. It was just one of our recorded meetings, and he's like, I think we should stop because like we're just kind of spinning our wheels. We're not really making the progress." And the meeting definitely sucked because it was like that negative, like realizing we're stopping.
Yep.
And I guess one of the other things that like I was friends with everyone on the team. Like we went to school together. So there was this like a bit of like feelings about the project sort of sorting to like nick at the like come in between the friendship, which was one thing I was very worried about, is that like people's feelings about the project coming in the way of our friendships, and like, oh man, am I not gonna like want to talk to these guys anymore because of the project not going well? But I ended up seeing them later again at another mutual friend's wedding, and like that was honestly my favorite thing that happened after the project we canceled, is that I saw that we all saw each other again at the wedding, and it was like as soon as I saw Antoine, it was like a big hug, and I'm like, oh thank God, we're still friends, even
Yeah.
though the project was like a scrap thing.
I love a happy ending like that.
And
Like I was actually legitimately worried that like I was gonna end up just not wanting to talk to Antoine ever again.
a lot of times, especially then as people move on and do other things and look back, there's a lot of learning that comes from, a failure or a pause or something that had to go a different direction or had to go on hold. And
Yeah.
when you have people in the trenches with you, if we want to add metaphors to
Yeah.
it, when you have that team, that that few band of brothers or whatever it might be, brothers and sisters banding together to do a thing, and it, even if it doesn't go well, you get a lot of connection that does tend to last, and you can look back on it and what you learn from it and bring it forward. So I encourage anyone that does get into a position where they need to stop a project or stop a product or move on from something to use that experience and build on it. I've done this throughout my career. We've had, I've done tech projects, and even points in my career, it was me and another guy, we were running a small company for a while. And it was in the last big economic downturn when things didn't go so well. And I had to leave it and go get a day job. And it worked out well, but I look back at that as there was a ton of things I learned out of that, and now I can take that forward.
Yeah.
Now you did go forward, and you're in the process right now. Why don't we talk about Parkour Posse and why you decided to go a little bit more of a solo route instead of getting everybody together and like doing a thing, and
Yeah.
how that started up.
It really started from like the fighting game like collapsing, and I was like, okay, something that I can do on my own. Like I can like do the engineering stuff. I mean, I was like, I knew I didn't have the illustration skills. So I was like, I'm gonna have to contract some artists for some of this, but like I can build the game and then show an artist like, here's this playable prototype. And then here's like a combination of here's the playable prototype with just like square boxes, and here's me writing out what I need, and then you give me the art that I need. Because I was like, all right, that's better than just like I need you to help me build the whole game from scratch.
Right. Because then you can be a little bit more in control of the scope. You
Yes.
can wrap your hands around the slice or the loop or what you want a game to be. And I think of this, in this case, you started with a little bit more controllable, a little bit more controllable game. So describe Parkour Posse, and what's going to be releasing relatively soon, and we'll put some, for the people that can see the video, we'll look it up, and we'll have notes in the show notes where you can go to Steam and check it out too. But describe it then for people, and then we can talk about why it's a little bit more understandable scope.
So Parkour Posse is a cooperative platformer. Two players take turns running through an obstacle course. Well, it's also playable by one person, but the idea is that you play with two people. So the first person runs through an obstacle course, and then the second player runs through that same obstacle course backwards. So the cool thing, or I think I guess the little spin on it, is that the level preserves state through both runs. The example I always give everyone to clarify is think about like in Mario, where you run over one of those little bridges and then all the little platforms are gone. When your friend
Mhm.
goes back, the bridge is still gone. So
Yeah.
if you I'm gonna hit every single like platform, your friend has nothing to walk on and they have to find some other way back. So the
What
idea is
did
that
you
you have
do
to
to
think.
me?
Yeah. So the idea is that like you all have to think about, okay, how is player one going to go to like still work for player two?
Right.
And it's a cumulative score. Like it's not like, well, I was fast and you were slow. Like no. Where the score it is counted together, so you all have to work together to be fast.
So it's a spin on a platformer. It's 2D side scroller. There's elements of that it seems like you could wrap your hands around and control a little bit more. But you could also, and it sounds like you did this to a great degree, put some of that design expertise into play and come up with a
Yeah,
twist on platformers that didn't sound all that familiar to me and sounded really, really cool. That
yeah,
cooperative platformer, go back and forth in each direction. The style of parkour as you're jumping through the different platforms and elements as you're going through the map feels really natural. It's a great concept to describe the platforming.
yeah,
But that almost like a puzzle or strategy built into it too adds an extra layer, adds some extra gameplay, but in a way that's not going to potentially break you as a developer and have to develop shields that wrap around broken ships.
yeah. And it's like I have a lot of respect for developers who are like, yo, I'm gonna spend like the next 8 years of my life working on this one thing. Like I respect you for seeing it to the end because I've worked on smaller games and had to cancel them, but I'm just like, yo, I don't want to work on Owlboy. Like I'm not trying to spend the next 13 years shipping this. I
Right.
want something that like I'm gonna spend like let's say a couple years, most of the work is happening on the weekends because I have a day job. And like I hit it and like, all right, cool. We ship it, we move to the next thing. Because most of this was meant to just be like a learning experience of like going through the entire process beginning to end.
And that I think is really important for people aspiring to get into games as well. You could try to go after the big giant white whale pie in the sky project first, but you learn a lot by shipping something. So if you can
Yeah.
start with a smaller scope and get a project out the door, you can learn a ton by just doing that because there are a lot more pieces to getting a game produced and published than being good at level design or being good at the animation or, coding up some good physics. There's a
Yeah.
lot. So now you're a
And
solo developer, and I know you've got some thoughts on what that means, being solo and how no one's really solo. Describe that, and we'll go back and forth on that a little bit.
for me, it's weird just because I've contracted a few people. So like I was in the Boston Festival of Indie Games showcase back in February or March. And that was my first time exhibiting the game anywhere. And the two things that people mentioned the most when they saw it were the art and the music. That like every single person who stopped and looked at it, like that was like the immediate draw to them. So the music was done by my friend Alex. He's a freelance composer and sound designer out of Austin. And the art was done by a couple of people that I happened to just track down through like scouring the internet. And they were like all of them, Alex and like Michelle and all of them were great. Ariel, all of them were great to work with, and it just felt weird to like just sort of condense their work to like just some contractors.
Right.
Like they're just some
Right.
guys I found to work on the house. Like they're just some contractors, and like they're the reason people are looking at my game.
Right.
And it just seems weird, like to just like it's like, oh well, let's talk about me, and not like the reason that you actually stopped by.
Yeah. In games today, very few people, if up to no one, is
Yeah,
truly solo. At a
yeah,
minimum, you're building on engines and platforms that other people have built.
yeah,
You're incorporating libraries and assets that you're potentially purchasing. You're
yeah,
you're buying fonts from Adobe or whatever the case may be, and a
yeah,
person
yeah,
developed that font. So that is one layer, and this is probably relatively recommended. And again, in my brainstorming of how my first game would go, I would go after and I would find an artist. So even if I'm developing the game and there's things that I'm good at, there's things that it's efficient for me to do, and there's places that I make sense for me to go and get help. So the solo developers, and I think this is most solo developers or even two-person developers. And when we talked to Terciops, there was two women who were developing their first, were putting out an iPhone game, not a first game, but an iPhone game. But they had a team behind them, and credits and everything, but a team that they were bringing in for some of the other pieces.
Yeah.
I think that's very natural and something people should not be afraid to do.
Yeah. So this is just my personal hot take, but I feel like there are a few people who are like actually have the experience to like do 30 different jobs. But most people are like, and they're actually able, like, that savant that can just do everything that a game studio needs. But statistically, you're just going to do 30 jobs poorly. And you'd have been better off just doing the things that you're good at and finding people to do the other stuff.
Right. And plus 25 of those jobs are not the ones you want to do anyway. So you're spending most of your time doing the stuff that's not your favorite thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. You spend like how much of your time did you spend on things that you hate?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That other people like. So and are good at. So they're sitting there by the, in their world going, and I wish somebody would give me the things I like to do. And you're torturing yourself to get this done, maybe through some misguided attempt to think you need to be solo. Yeah. But that's not the way the best projects ever get made. So,
yeah.
Well, that's exciting. So how long did it take to get you to where you are today with Parkour Posse? And I know, again, this is going to be weird because you were doing it some on the weekends and you were doing it on the side. So how much duration and then kind of like how much effort wise? Let's talk about both of those.
Yeah, I guess in duration, it's coming up on 3 years. I'm trying to weird because it's like it's only on the weekends, and then there were definitely like gaps in time when I didn't do anything because I was playing Fire Emblem.
Yep.
I'm gonna be honest. It was just like I looked at my commit history and I'm like, that's when Fire Emblem Three Houses came out. It's a long gap of productivity.
That's research and inspiration. It's integral to the process.
No, it wasn't. It just stopped working.
So that's a pretty long duration, and then but weekends, spare time throughout the course of that, take some time off here and there to do other fun, either side projects or fun things.
In terms of actual active effort, maybe a year.
Yeah,
I'm kind of spitballing here.
Yeah, so it's not insignificant to put out a fully realized game, and people also need to remember that.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between the proof of concept that comes out of a game jam, for example, where a few people get together, they spend 16 hours over the course of 3 days and put together a concept, and actually turning it into a full game. There's a big leap as far as that goes. And then anything you add onto it, and this is where we get to, and we've talked to the AAA studios, this is where you get to 4 or 5 years with 300 people, and they're making a game. You can expand. The software is a fluid, and it will expand to fill the container. So you do want to cut it off and create some constraints and some guidelines so that you can make sure that you ship something and get a product out there. But it's not trivial, and there's a bunch of pieces. So as you went through some of those pieces over the course of, say, of that year's worth of effort or the 3 year worth of duration, what would you say were the places you were most surprised on, things you had to do that started taking much longer than you expected?
I think it was the interfacing with the artists. Like, there's nothing that really bothered me about this project. Like, I enjoyed all of it because there was so much to learn that I just literally never considered. That I just I haven't had to do this before. Now I'm having to do it. Like, having to be the one who's architecting and saying, okay, here's what this game's art direction needs to be.
Yeah.
But I'm not an artist, so I need to just sit down and think what will these color schemes be? Because I'm paying the people. I can't tell them to decide my art direction. So I have to just sit down and think, what do I want this game to look like? Like, do I want it to just look like a gymnasium? Like, where do I want this game setting to be? And just really having to just sit down and just think about what all of those like graphical elements are going to be, like doing research into like other games to sort of say like, all right, cool, here's a screenshot from this game. Here's the sort of like style I want you to use.
So like creating, you probably, in effect, whether you called it that or not, creating mood boards where you've got
Yeah.
inspiration elements and you package this together, because then you can give that
Yeah.
kind of thing to an artist.
Yeah, you were doing the design, and that's where you want to be. You're the game designer.
Yeah. It was just things I've never had to do before, and it was really fun. Like, oh, really just sit down and think, okay, like what like in detail that I haven't had to consider before. Like, okay, like what do I want this character's clothes to look like?
Yeah.
And for the music too, like because thankfully I was able to go back and forth with. I mean, I was able to go back and forth with all of them, like with my friend Alex. Like, okay, like I'd sent him a couple tracks, and because he's an actual musician, he's like, okay, like you pick these couple of songs, but they don't really blend in the way that you think you do. So like, let's go back and say like, all right, which piece of this song do you like? Like, is it the chorus? Is it the drums? Like, what is it about this song that really hits to you? And then having to really drill down to think like how each piece works together and what is it that I really want.
Yeah, interesting. The graphics, sound. You as as a solo designer, even in this case, how much did you document what you were doing? I mean, were you like writing up design documents, or were you just like writing some notes that you could pass off and trade off with the people that you were working with? Because I'm better
So
or worse at some of that sometimes.
so I took notes for like as I went started, and basically enough to give me like a solid idea of like here's what I want the game to be. Basically enough that like if someone else was to read through, I'm like, okay, I have an idea of what this game is supposed to be. Because of the like how small the game was, I didn't like update the document every time I like made a minor change.
Yeah.
Because just like like if for a larger game, I would have like there would have been an argument for doing that.
Right. 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 Right.
The
And
only
I
time I made sure there was real detail, sorry to cut you off, but just like for the things when I was hiring people, like the music stuff and the art stuff, I made sure if we discussed any change, I updated that because that was their like, I am paying you to do this thing. Let me make sure it accurately reflects what we discussed.
And that's a great way to think about it. There's the point of documenting in order to order your own thoughts, and that serves a purpose. And then there's a point in documentation as a communication tool, and a
Yeah.
communication tool back and forth between people. And being consistent in that regard, especially, really helps both sides. It helps everyone sort of make sure that it comes together and it connects to the design. And that's interesting.
Yeah.
So how long till Parker, Park, Parkour Posse? I
Parker.
don't know why it keeps popping into my head.
No.
How long till it
Yeah.
releases?
Like a couple of weeks. I need to check in with Nick. So he was giving me some advice on how to do and helping me with the online networking, and he was the one that actually worked with me on a previous project. So a funny joke about that. Um, as I was talking with him, as I was reading up about like just online networking, he was mentioning that it's a thing he was interested in, like on his own, in addition to his just normal job as a graphics engineer. And I jokingly mentioned to him, and I was like, "Hey, I know a game where you can just do the online networking. You don't need to build a whole game." And then he was like, and then
Crafty.
for a little bit of back and forth between us, I eventually got him to agree to help me out with the networking. And then it's funny because right when I was like on the plane to LA, he was just messaging me. He was like, "I want you to know how much I hate UI programming." He was like, "It is the raisin brand of game development." And I was
Huh.
just like, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Yeah. Well,
But he's like, "I do this for you."
yeah. Again, with understanding that there are people that love that. So
Yeah.
there's the reason that as you get into your next project, then you're gonna hire a UI designer, and you're gonna
Yeah.
hire an artist and audio direction, and
So, like when you sit down to make a game, you know that you're going to need art, and you know that you're going to need music, and you know that there's going to be some coding. But how do you know that you're going to need online networking and maybe 6 other things that we haven't talked about yet? Is that experience and your college degree or college experience?
Yeah, I feel like that is kind of experience. It's a thing is that as you start building it, like, and just reading more and have an understanding of like what goes into a game, you know what you need to hire. So it's like, for instance, actually, one of the things that I realized partway through the game is that I decided I wanted to do 2D assets for all of it. But when I was in the process of like building the levels, I realized that because I don't have a full-time artist, I just sort of contracted someone to make the little like 2D asset blocks that I was building together. It was very difficult to like design lots of the levels because if you need to like rotate a 2D asset, like really the 2D artist would just draw it from another angle or another perspective.
Right.
Like you're
Hmm.
kind of limited how much you can rotate that. Whereas with a 3D asset, like a 3D model, there's much more like
Yeah,
freedom
you
of
can
movement
actually
there.
rotate it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's much more tweaking you could do there to like get more out of like the limited assets that I have. So I spent a like if you look through levels, you'll be like, oh, I see he's really doing his best to like, oh, he just changed that to the color green and like smacked them to couple together to like make a new asset block.
Yeah.
So that was the thing that
But
I
that's
realized partway
reasonable.
through, like, oh
But
yeah,
that's real creativity when you have limitations like that.
yeah. There was also another thing I realized when because I would read about like developers that were trying to like get creative with limitations, and then when I'm like, all right, cool, I've already paid for these assets. What am I gonna do? And I'm like, oh, this is what they mean when they mean budgets create creativity.
Yeah. Back in the day, software that you also had, which still exists, but much less today, was the technical constraints as well. And
Memory.
things really got creative when you only had 16
Hmm.
bits of data fields to
Yeah,
work with, and 64K of RAM, and you were trying
yeah,
to cram all of your art assets, your sprites, down into 64K.
yeah,
Uh, Lots of reuse of assets back in those days, for sure.
yeah.
I I'm impressed by what people are able to do with 2D. I think in 3D, and I've done work both in business development inside of Unity and a couple other sets of assets, some augmented reality work, and now some of the stuff that I'm playing around with in Unity. I feel like I can only think in 3D, in 3D objects, and I can use Blender and I can create models. 2D, as you said, just seems to me, and with the way I think about it, much more difficult. And I know not everybody thinks that way. In fact, a lot of game programs will start you out in 2D. And if you take an orthographic camera or a single fixed camera view, then you can flatten a lot of things much more effectively. But as you said, to if the camera needs to rotate it all, or the character needs to rotate it all, or the object that they're stepping on needs to rotate outside of the flat plane that it's in, well, then I don't know. Then I might as well just model it in 3D and take snapshots of the
Hmm.
frames and create a sprite progression off of that.
Yeah. So generally, I wish I could like have like a little chart, but essentially, it's like I could use my hand. So a sort of like the sort of like the amount of assets you have, and then this is like time.
Yeah,
So it's like 2D is sort of like a linear graph of just like assets over time, and then 3D is like an exponential curve. Like it takes you longer to get started with 3D to really get like all of this stuff that you need going. But then once
Hmm.
you're going, you start like climbing up, like you like catch up to 2D and then get ahead much faster, farther.
got it, got it. Because you've created the environment and platform and models, and then the manipulation of those models to create new scenes or have them do different things it accelerates.
Yeah,
Um,
like I'm simplifying because I'm not like a 3D artist, but like
yeah,
basically, yeah.
yeah. There is a big barrier to entry with 3D, as you say, and this is what people have to consider. There's the creation of the model, there's the refinement of the model so that it works on the platform that you're thinking about working. You have to do the topology of the model. And then there's the textures and the painting. You still have to be an artist and you still have to paint and texture and create the texture maps. That is a huge effort.
Yeah.
But then once you're there, then I was going to say, then you rig it, although that's a big project.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I
then-
know what you mean. It's like they're both lots of work, but they're just different in
yeah,
terms of like
yeah,
what they
that's
need.
interesting. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
What I want to do for future games is actually combine the two. So I want to have like 3D environments with like 2D characters.
Mm.
I've just always thought that look is just super cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there are some interesting things you can do both directions. 2D background and scene assets with a 3D character that sort of rides along, or 3D environments with 2D characters, and depending on how it's blended uh, and rendered at design time and development time, you can get some really interesting effects.
Yeah.
talk more about that. Talk more about the future. What else? What kinds of big ideas are you thinking?
The immediate next project I can tell you is going to be a mobile game based on Parkour Posse. There were just a bunch of ideas that I had in the process of development, but I was a good ways into this, and this is me saying like, okay, we're not scope creeping this. I'm not refactoring all of this game and tossing all of this out.
Because
Like,
you learned that lesson.
I made this mistake already. I was like, no, like we've created a scope. We've had this project. We're going to like see it to the end and like finish this project and ship it.
Yeah.
And then I'll take everything I've learned from just finishing the game and say, okay, let's make the mobile game. Let's all the things that I want to try in the next game, let's try them in the mobile game. Like even if like only a few hundred people, like by however many people actually play Parkour Posse, I can talk to them and have okay, now I have actual players to get feedback from and say, okay, I have this idea for a mobile game based on this. What would you like to see? What would you not like to see? What
Right.
what parts of this did you were interested you or not interested in? And then it's not me just like theory crafting in my apartment. Like I've got actual players to talk to.
Which is huge. And I think that's a really big tip for everyone. Getting a game out there or getting a slice out there, getting it in the hands of players, creating a community that then can cheer you on and help drive the next project is really big. But getting that feedback on is this game loop working? Is it working for the majority of people? I know it works for me, but is it working for you? And being able to sort of see where that goes.
I mean, I think creating that community, though, is going to be something that you might need to outsource a little bit because that's a lot of work right there.
Yeah. Managing
I
a
mean,
community.
is that the kind of work
yeah.
you want to do? Creating it and managing it, yeah.
What are your thoughts there?
Not. Absolutely not.
Right.
Actually, at PAX East, I met someone who she was a community manager for a co-op game, Operation Tango, and I got some cool like had a lot of cool time talking with her about some of the stuff they did on their co-op game. And then she mentioned that she's part of this group that does like community management stuff or like marketing stuff for like other indie games, and I'm like, oh, perfect. You've worked on a co-op game. I want to make some co-op games, and you can just be paid to do the social media aspect. I can just hand you some money and never touch this Twitter
There you
account
go.
again. Perfect.
Once again, we hear about the value of just getting yourself out there and talking to people.
Yeah.
Because if you hadn't been at that show, yeah.
I found some people to do the thing they're good at, and I'll do the thing I'm good at, and everything will be handled.
Yeah. That's a great way to think about it. Now, you did that at PAX East.
Yes.
And I know you've been involved with like the indie game scene in Boston a little bit, and there's this people from school. Are anything else where you would recommend people go out and do to just make these kinds of connections to get involved with people?
If you're just starting, I would just say that yeah, there's definitely like GameMaker.com or just for like a small community of just obviously that's specific to GameMaker, but game jams. If you just search for game jams, there's definitely like sites and communities to sort of find open teams to just sort of jump on small projects. Like Global Game Jam hosts like a big one annually, and that's a place to like find communities. There's other sort of smaller communities around specific tools that host them.
Yep.
Yeah, but I would say like find a community of people who just want to make things for the fun of making them, and then just start interfacing with those people, and just from doing those small projects, like learn and grow over time.
Excellent. And that sounds like what we've heard some other people talk about. Local groups that maybe are part of International Games Developer Association, IGDA. I'm plugged into a few different game developer discords that will run like the Unity developer discord and the Unreal Engine developer discord, and they'll run like game jam stuff as part of that. GDL, Game Developer League. Hey, there's a game jam running this weekend, maybe virtually. That does seem interesting. Again, you're getting down in the trenches with a team, maybe even just for a short time. You're trying things out. You're almost, in a way, with that kind of thing, I would imagine, interviewing potential partners for the future. Because you're getting to see, can you work together? How do they work? What are their strengths? Is this someone I should make a note of and remember for next time when I need someone to do a thing? That seems like a great opportunity.
What I found, or at least for myself and then with friends, what works a lot better is to just find people that like start with like we're gonna work together for the fun of making a thing, Like, don't start with like, "Hey, I need you to come work for me."
Yeah.
Like, we're just gonna jump on this game together. We're gonna have a blast. Like, there's no expectations of this gonna be like, we're gonna make money off this thing.
Yeah.
And then
You
just
have to
take
let
each
that part go. Yeah.
yes. Like, let go of the ego, let go of your like financial interest, and just like obviously within like whatever your like means and situation are, like if you are in a situation where you need to focus on finances, then step back and like take care of yourself. I can't like speak to everyone's like situation.
Sure. But that does, and I think what you're alluding to is that puts a whole layer of complexity into the model. And then you need to be really good at the business side of things if you're going to go down that path. Business and
Yeah.
funding and creating a company and organizations and legal and HR. And do you want to do all that, or do you want to make a game?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and some people want to do that, and they want to do that within the games industry, and that's really cool. And that's when you
Yes.
get interesting new studios that start up. They're not the ones necessarily down there coding the thing, but they're creating a studio that then creates things, and that can be really rewarding from its own perspective. But it's a very different set of skills, and it's a very different
Yeah.
job. Interesting. So we get a little bit further out. You got any ideas out there? I'll quick rapid fire. I'll throw a couple things at you to see if anything,
Yeah.
if you got a hot take on any of these things. Metaverse, augmented reality, NFT, play to earn. Is that the worst thing ever, or just very evil? Is artificial intelligence and machine learning making games for us? What do you think?
So I'm trying to go through each of those. So Metaverse, I feel like the people who are most interested, or I guess the people who are like the most of like loudest current voices, are not the people who should be listened to. Like Second Life existed like 10 years ago. Like this isn't like a brand. Like
Longer.
this isn't a brand. Yeah, even longer than 10 years. So it's like I almost feel like if the goal is to just build a community where people just sort of like spend this time coexisting, we should be looking at what's already been built a very long time ago, ending building from there, and not like I'm gonna figure this out from scratch. Like why? Like you don't like we don't
Right.
need to figure this out from scratch.
Right.
There's no not
Yeah, that's a good one.
yeah. And anyone who has no concept of anything that's been done before, I'm like, listen, you really need to go read back to like a lot of the research and history that people have been doing over
Right.
like the decades. You should not be starting from scratch at this. Like this is nonsense.
I think there was a recent quote very similar to that from Phil Spencer of Xbox, who runs the whole entire Xbox division, which was basically Metaverse. That's interesting. It's been going on for decades. You know, World of Warcraft is an example of Metaverse that's been around for
Yeah,
15
it really
years
is.
now. So
Yeah.
so don't ignore that for one, and for two, then I think the best examples of Metaverse of the future is where hopefully we can open up the platforms, we can get interoperability, we can take the things that we love off of how the internet works, where we're connected between websites and we're connected socially, use 3D and VR and augmented reality, probably even more likely than full immersive virtual reality, in an interconnected open environment and not a walled garden.
Yeah.
So walled
Right.
gardens are going to be constrained, and I think they're going to fail.
Yeah. For AR and VR, my friend Corey is actually getting his PhD at Virginia Tech for like I forget I guess what his official job title will be, but his research is focusing on like human interfaces for like VR and AR. So it's really cool to talk to him and pick his brain about like the kind of research papers he's doing, like talking to his professors and what other people are doing in that field. Like I know he was recently working on a project called Loops, I think it was, where basically it was this research about basically giving surgeons a better basically a sort of like better view into like what's happening inside the human body
Mhm.
when they're doing surgeries, as opposed to just like I think this artery is clotted, we're gonna find out. Obviously I'm being silly, but like the idea to like possibly give surgeons a better idea of like what's happening inside of you, which I'm like, oh, that's super cool.
Yeah.
And all the different uses for it.
Yeah. That augmented reality is, especially in industry and business and farm, in healthcare and manufacturing, in retail, in all of those disciplines, augmented reality. When I have a job to do, the job exists in the physical world. using augmented reality to overlay information on that to allow me to be more effective and get things done and see what's going on and have information that's sort of fed to me, but overlaid on the world. That's a place where there's already good examples, as you're describing, of where that's making an impact.
Yeah.
If we can add to that the social aspects and the interconnections between people, now we've connected that to basically to a metaverse.
Yeah.
So
And it's
that all
interesting to
comes back
talk
around.
to him about, yeah. And it's interesting to talk to him to see about like different, like, let's say different industries, like, let's say retail, about like what their interests are in terms about like augmented reality and like what kind of interfaces they might want and how it might be totally different from like healthcare.
That human interaction model is going to be very complex and different between those.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Well, this has been excellent. I know we left off some of those big ideas, but we can come back for round 2.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what happens with Parkour Posse. It's on my wish list and
Yay.
excited to get it out there. I know you'll have to put the finishing touches on it by the time this comes out. Hopefully it's still just a couple weeks away. People can go check it
Yes.
out on Steam and wishlist it right now.
Yep.
Super exciting to be on that cusp of getting a game out the door. So I can't wait
Yes.
to catch up with you after and just see sort of how it all turned out and how it felt.
Yep. Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun talking to you.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
This has been a New Overlords production. For more, please visit newoverlords.com for video, subscribe and feed links, and other ways to help the show.